At 05:35 on 10th May 1940, the war France expected to fight had already begun to change. Across Western Europe, German aircraft moved toward their targets as armored and motorized formations crossed into Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The offensive had begun. For France and Britain, another long European war seemed to be unfolding. The memory of 1914 still shaped military thinking. Defensive lines, fortified positions, and prepared plans were meant to absorb the German attack. But this time, the battlefield would move faster. Behind the opening airstrikes, German columns advanced toward the Allied defensive system. Their objective was not simply to capture territory. They were attempting to break the Allied armies apart before those armies could understand what was happening. Within weeks, France would face a question few expected to ask. How could a military power fall quickly? The strongest defenses were facing the wrong direction. After the First World War, French military thinking was shaped by the memory of trenches, artillery, and enormous casualties. France prepared for another war in which fortified positions could slow a German advance and give time for armies to mobilize. The Maginot Line became a visible expression of that strategy, stretching along much of France's eastern frontier. But Allied planners also expected Germany to attack through Belgium. When the offensive began, British and French forces moved north to meet that threat, following a plan designed around the battlefield they expected. There was one dangerous assumption beneath it all. The Ardennes, with its forests, narrow roads, and difficult terrain, was considered unsuitable for a concentration of German armor. If Germany tried to pass through that region, the movement was expected to be slow and vulnerable. Germany's plan depended on proving that assumption wrong. The decisive weapon was not necessarily the fastest tank. It was the ability to make thousands of vehicles move as one force. On 10th of May 1940, Germany opened its western offensive with multiple army groups, each serving a different purpose. Army Group B attacked through Belgium and the Netherlands, while Army Group A carried the main armored thrust through the Ardennes. Opposing them were French armies, the British Expeditionary Force, and the Belgian and Dutch forces defending their territory. The numbers alone did not determine what followed. German formations relied on radio communications, reconnaissance, air support, and coordinated logistics to keep the advance moving. Tanks provided mobility and firepower, but commanders needed information, fuel, ammunition, and functioning communications to turn that equipment into operational speed. The British and French armies also possessed substantial forces and modern equipment. Their problem was increasingly one of coordination, command, and reacting to a rapidly changing battlefield. The campaign would last roughly 6 weeks, but the decisive question was already emerging. Where would Germany concentrate its main attack? Then Germany revealed the answer. For years, the Ardennes had been treated as a barrier. In May 1940, it became a highway. German armored formations pushed through the forested terrain toward the Meuse River, concentrating their strength around Sedan. French commanders had expected the difficult landscape to slow any major armored advance. Instead, German columns emerged at the river with remarkable speed. On 13th May, German forces began attacking across the Meuse. The following day, additional crossings were established as Luftwaffe attacks struck French positions and communications. Under mounting pressure, parts of the French defense began to lose cohesion. The geography now mattered enormously. Once German forces secured bridgeheads across the river, the natural obstacle that had protected the French position was behind them. Roads leading west opened toward the French interior. The breakthrough did not mean France had immediately lost the war. French forces still possessed large formations capable of fighting, but an operational gap had appeared, and German commanders moved quickly to widen it. The river had been crossed. Now the German advance had somewhere to go. The Allied armies had moved north to meet Germany. Now the battlefield was moving behind them. After breaking through at Sedan, German armored formations pushed west with extraordinary speed. Their advance was no longer aimed simply at defeating individual French positions. It was cutting across the communications and supply routes connecting the Allied armies in Belgium with the rest of France. The British Expeditionary Force and French armies farther north now faced a dangerous dilemma. They could continue advancing toward the German forces in Belgium, following the original plan, or begin withdrawing before the German thrust closed behind them. Every hour mattered. German columns passed through towns and crossroads, while Allied commanders struggled to determine exactly where the main armored forces were moving. Reports arrived quickly, but the situation on the ground changed even faster. By late May, German forces had reached the English Channel, splitting the Allied armies and trapping large formations against the coast. What had begun as an advance into Belgium had become an enormous encirclement. The question was no longer how to stop the German advance. It was whether the trapped armies could escape before the circle closed. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were trapped against the sea. Their only remaining route led across it. By late May 1940, British, French, and Belgian forces were compressed into the shrinking pocket around Dunkirk. German forces had reached the Channel, cutting the Allied armies off from the south. Behind the troops was the sea. Ahead, German forces continued to press inward. Then the German armored advance temporarily stopped. The reasons for the halt remain debated by historians. Concerns about terrain, exhausted formations, defensive positions, and the role of higher command all formed part of the discussion. Whatever the precise balance of reasons, the pause gave the Allies time they desperately needed. On 26th of May, Operation Dynamo began. British warships, transport vessels, and hundreds of civilian boats crossed the English Channel to help evacuate the trapped forces. Soldiers waited on beaches and improvised piers, while vessels moved repeatedly between France and Britain. The evacuation became one of the most remarkable rescues of the war. But it was not a battlefield victory. The Allied armies had suffered a major strategic defeat and abandoned much of their equipment. For the men being evacuated, survival meant leaving behind guns, vehicles, ammunition, and positions they had expected to defend. The escape changed Britain's immediate military situation, but the campaign continued elsewhere. Dunkirk saved an army. It did not save France. 35 days after the German offensive began, German soldiers were marching into Paris. After Dunkirk, the German advance turned south. France still had armies capable of fighting, but the strategic situation had changed dramatically. The forces that had moved north toward Belgium had been shattered or withdrawn, and the remaining French formations now faced a German army advancing from multiple directions. French commanders attempted to establish new defensive lines, but there was little time to rebuild a coherent front. German forces continued pressing forward, exploiting the gaps created during the earlier breakthrough. On 14th of June 1940, German troops entered Paris. The French capital was declared an open city, avoiding a major battle inside its streets. The political crisis deepened. The French government sought an armistice, and on 22nd June, representatives of France and Germany signed the armistice at Compiègne. From 10 May to 22nd June, the campaign had lasted roughly 6 weeks. Yet France had not simply stopped fighting. French soldiers continued resisting in many locations, while commanders struggled against a rapidly deteriorating strategic position. The speed of the collapse was extraordinary, but the surrender raised a question that would remain controversial for decades. How had a major military power fallen so quickly? The battlefield had changed faster than the doctrine designed to control it. Germany had not won simply because every German weapon was better. The campaign exposed the combined importance of command, communications, reconnaissance, air support, operational tempo, and geography. French forces possessed substantial equipment and trained soldiers, but battlefield adaptability could matter more than preparation alone. The Maginot Line was not simply useless. It was part of a larger defensive system built around assumptions about where Germany would attack. When those assumptions failed, the strength of the defenses could not compensate for the speed of events elsewhere. The consequences reached far beyond France. Britain remained in the war, Germany gained control over much of Western Europe, and Dunkirk became a lasting symbol of survival in Britain. The Battle of France was therefore more than 6 weeks of fighting. It was a demonstration of how quickly strategy can become reality, and how quickly reality can destroy strategy.